This is Common Sense Generation. Common Sense Generation.
Hi guys, my name is Kądzielska-Koper and this is Common Sense Generation. We talk about the practices of common sense, how to do it today. Peter Berkowitz, the senior fellow at Hoover Institute, Stanford University. Thank you very much.
Pleasure to be here.
Peter, before we go to the topic, say a little bit few more words about yourself, what you do professionally and how you achieved this. What was your path?
Well, it's been a long and winding path. As you mentioned, I'm a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, Stanford University. This is a position for men and women who have worked in academic life. I used to be a professor of political philosophy, and I also used to be a professor of law. And many of us who arrived at Hoover have sort of shifted to writing for the public. I used to publish scholarly books, so I've written about a book about Nietzsche. I've written a book about the early modern liberal tradition, character in the modern liberal tradition. But over the last 20 years or so, I spent a lot of time writing about writing for a more general public. And that I've been able to do that by the Hoover Institution. And my areas fall roughly into four broad categories. I write a lot about political ideas, right and left in America, conservative and progressive. I write a lot about liberal education, which is in a very bad condition in the United States. For something different, I write a lot about Middle East politics, especially Israel, from which I've just come. I spent 12 days in Israel. And as a result of 2 years that I spent in the State Department, 2019 to 2021, as the director of the policy planning staff under Mike Pompeo, I've been writing over the last few years a fair amount about China, the China challenge and human rights in U.S. foreign policy. That's a description.
Wonderful. So when you were writing about China, of course, all of this narrative is sort of formed by Graham Allison and the Thucydides trap. And it seems like U.S. is really treating this threat of China seriously, especially since the administration of Donald Trump and Mike Pompeo. So you were in the center of it.
I was a senior advisor to Mike Pompeo. I was the policy planning staff in the State Department is a kind of small think tank that is part of the Secretary's office. The head of policy planning reports directly to him. And as part of our work that year, those 2 years, we produced a paper for Secretary Pompeo called The Elements of the China Challenge, which, as you were indicating, this was a major issue for Pompeo, and we wanted to summarize how Mike Pompeo and the Trump administration more broadly had shifted U.S. foreign policy to focus on what we regarded as the worldwide challenge, the China challenge.
China challenge created by sort of Henry Kissinger and his politics of opening, of course, China America. But I think American administration never thought that this path from Deng Xiaoping to Xi Jinping will be so rough, and Xi Jinping will be so eager to reshape this geopolitical situation. Can you tell us in a nutshell what were the conclusion of this paper?
Yes, although I must elaborate on your excellent point about the Kissinger-Nixon opening to China. There were geopolitical reasons for that, to balance against the Soviet Union. And several administrations after that saw a great opportunity in China that if we brought China in to the international order and we promoted economic liberalization, we would get also political liberalization. This was wrong. And I think it's not just because of Xi Jinping, who is a harsher ruler than his immediate predecessors, but it's because, and this is one of the conclusions of our report, it's because the Chinese Communist Party, which rules China, has a grand strategic vision. The grand strategic vision is this: that China has to be more than the dominant player in the Indo-Pacific. China has to be more than the preeminent power in the world. China must transform the world order, placing Beijing at the center and creating an order that's more friendly to authoritarianism. This is what we realized in the Trump administration, and not just in the State Department, but in the National Security Council and in the Defense Department. And the different parts of the administration were working on helping the government and helping American citizens and speaking with our allies abroad, but everybody understand how central the China challenge is. And may I add one other point? The China challenge is different from the Soviet challenge. In Poland, you know a lot about the Soviet challenge. The Soviets proceeded often by way of military. They imposed military governments and they exported arms. China operates differently. China operates through diplomacy and the creation of economic dependence. And therefore, but in fact, the China challenge is playing out in every region of the world. So it was part of the mission of Mike Pompeo to help to reorient the State Department to see that American diplomacy had to improve everywhere in the world, in Europe, in Africa, in the Middle East, in Asia, and South America, because the Chinese were undertaking a quest for supremacy in each of those regions.
Neocolonization of Africa, getting over the many mines and factories, creating their own roads, creating their own villages, in small cities behind the walls, trading with South America, not in dollar, but in yen, in yuan. And trying to make yuan a international currency. All definitely bringing a challenge to US, but I'm actually a huge fan of political thought of Lee Kuan Yew, so the first Prime Minister of Singapore. But what he said is very interesting, that if China ever becomes a democracy, it will fall apart, because it is not a nation state. It is a huge civilization with different languages, with a different, in his history, divided into many countries, with a different also style of political order, but mostly, of course, led by the Mandarins. And what Asia altogether, but what China is most afraid of, is something called in Chinese luan, which is chaos. Chaos of political instability. And they have experienced this. They have experienced this during this moment of colonization by the British, and they are so afraid of it that they are very eager to give up of their rights, the political rights, their civic rights, just to have peace.
Yes, I think that's right, but it's especially true of the members of the Chinese Communist Party. Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, would always distinguish between the CCP and the Chinese people and say, we, the United States, we have no truck, we have no disagreement with the Chinese people. We have our disagreements with harsh disagreements with the CCP, and for two kinds of reasons. One is harsh internal suppression. Remember, the Chinese Communist Party now runs the most massive and intrusive police state in human history. Massive because the number of people, almost 1.5 billion people, but intrusive because of technology. They have the technology to monitor individuals in a way totalitarians before them could not even imagine. Christians are oppressed in China. The Uyghurs are oppressed. In fact, Mike Pompeo issued a determination, official State Department determination on his last day or second last day in office, finding that the Chinese Communist Party is guilty of crimes against humanity and genocide against the Uyghurs. They're ethnic Mongolians in the northeastern part of China. There's Tibet. So there's the internal oppression, massive violations of human rights, which is not justified by any kind of fear of chaos. But also, beyond China's borders, there is the effort to make the world more friendly to authoritarianism. There's the crackdown on Hong Kong, which from late winter, early spring 2020. There are the rattling of sabers in the Taiwan Strait, which other regional powers greatly fear. There's the creation of economic dependence in all regions of the world. So it may be true that China has legitimate fears about unrest because even internally, it's a great empire. But I don't believe any of this justifies the outrageous offenses against basic human rights, either inside China or on its boundaries.
Right now, we even don't know how many protests are actually taking place in China, but we can observe them on certain limits that, for example, of this promotion of Mandarin language all over China, banning all content in Cantonese, which after all is a huge minority of people speaking this language. And suddenly there are, for example, all this content on TikTok is banned and stops to exist. And of course, this is all this policy of Xi Jinping of bringing the Han identity as a main one, which is actually very anti-Chinese in the history because it always embraced the differences and the different forms, either in language, cuisine, way of life, dressing. China was the civilization rather incorporating even the last dynasty in Chinese monarchy system. Those were Manchurians, so they were not Chinese originals, but they were incorporated in the Chinese system and becoming Chinese. But right now, it seems like everything what is not Han, what is not mainstream Mandarin is banned. It's scary to look how far it gets, because it's, after all, it's a lot of people to unify.
Yes.
So try to make them united under one portrait of Mao at the Tiananmen Square.
So that's right. So there are two questions that arise. One is already implied in how you presented it, the question of justice. Is this kind of oppression just? But another one is this a recipe for stability? In other words, is all this pressure going to enable Xi and the CCP to escape instability? Or is all of this effort to impose sameness and Han Chinese superiority, is that going to be the recipe for chaos that brings the CCP down? We don't know the answer.
We don't know the answer. But another, again, Lee Kuan Yew said a very interesting thing, that the Chinese civilization is like a picture, like a mosaic. And this mosaic is there already 3,000 years. And communism is just like sort of a sign on it. The rain will come, it will wash it out, and the mosaic stays. But Confucianism, in its major form, is of course very hierarchical. And it's, even though it's egalitarian because you can become a bureaucrat, it's not a born aristocracy, but it's still the ultimate power in the hands of the Mandarins. It's definitely not democratic.
It's definitely not democratic, but we also have to keep in mind the following. Some people say, Xi Jinping says that Chinese have a different way of understanding rights. You Westerners understand rights in terms of individuals. We have a collective understanding of rights, actually like the multiculturalists. And so we can do terrible things, but for the sake of the collectivity. So one could think, the Confucian culture is not friendly to democracy. But that's a leap we should not make, because we've actually in real time run an experiment. South Korea is Confucian, Taiwan is Confucian, Hong Kong people were steeped in Confucianism, and these societies chose democracy. So
it's not impossible to embrace both values.
The clear historical evidence is that it's not impossible. We should conclude that there are elements and dimensions within Confucianism that point against, but there are clearly elements that enable democracy. South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong are tremendous, have been, well, Hong Kong until it was taken over by China in 2020, but they have been, they were huge, South Korea and Taiwan still are huge democratic successes within the Confucian world, and Hong Kong was. So that should keep us aware that it's wrong, even for Xi Jinping, to suggest that China is inherently, irreversibly anti-democratic.
Interesting point to present, and of course, in fact, it's a bomb ticking, and we see it so vividly that it is hard to imagine where it takes us, all of us. But definitely very important to observe very closely, especially that it seems like the other countries in the region are more and more aware of this very huge threat.
Yes.
And even the sort of testimony of Shinzo Abe in Japan, even because of his death, it's even becoming bigger and bigger that they are trying to make their military stronger, which never happened since the World War II, for obvious reasons.
Yes.
But now the history, like it's other way around, then our US and Japan are allies in the regions against the bigger threat of this world in the order of China. And obviously there was a Chinese order in the region for many, many centuries. As everyone wants to mention always about Chonghua, so the Chinese name for China is always the center,
the Middle Kingdom.
The Middle Kingdom, the middle of the world, and the rest is peripheries.
Yes, it's very instructive for we from the West to take a look at a Chinese map of the world. These maps on the wall, square, rectangular. So our maps, for some reason, have Europe more or less in the middle. Russian China are over here or over there. The first time you ever see a Chinese map of the world, what's that? And then you say, of course, in a Chinese map of the world, a rectangular map, China is in the middle, is in the very middle. So it is very interesting. Before, you made reference earlier to China's century of humiliation. The British arrive in the late 1830s. They more or less conquer and they impose their will. Lasts for 100 years. Until that period, China understood itself to be and experienced itself to be literally at the center of the world, because all the many countries on its periphery recognized China as the looming power.
Supreme cultural the way of writing characters, even all the intellectuals in Korea, they were able to write Chinese characters. Japan, after all, using Chinese characters.
That's
all of those. The fact that, of course, this exposure of this culture was the higher one in the region.
And here's what has not changed with communism. Xi Jinping still regards China as the Middle Kingdom. But now, since the 1830s, with the passage of this century of humiliation, the known world is now extended beyond the borders of China in the South China Sea to embrace the entire globe. But the entire globe hasn't caught up yet in recognition, especially one power, the United States of America, and friends and allies. So Xi Jinping, even though he's in one sense a communist, as Lee Kuan Yew suggesting, what he really is a traditional Chinese emperor who demands that China be recognized as at the center of the world. So he speaks of socialism with Chinese characteristics. But I agree, that's a tool for reestablishing in the contemporary world, China as the Middle Kingdom, and therefore the countries around China, actually the entire world, have a right, are properly concerned about China's quest for that, not just preeminence, but a determination to change world order.
Coming back to Graham Allison, from who I started.
Please.
Is it Carthage Rome? Rome Carthage? How do you see it as also analysis?
I think it's true. China, China, I would not call it anymore a rising power. I would call it a risen power. China has the second largest economy in the world by some measure, for sure second largest. It's a number one or number two or number three trading partner with all of America's best friends. It's a major trading partner with America. It, as you said, it has a Belt and Road Initiative, Bridge and Road Initiative that is not just for Indo-Pacific or Central Asia, has expanded to include Africa and South America. So China's quest to unseat the United States as the preeminent power is, yes, deeply destabilizing for the world. In that sense, we are facing a challenge that reminds one of going all the way back to Spartan's rise. There is a Spartan's rise against Athens.
Carthage. Spartan rise against Athens, of course.
Yes.
There was the original conflict.
The original, but there are many, as you point out, there are many versions.
The most
of
dramatic is, of course, Rome Carthage, because it ended in the slaughter.
Yes. So yes, it's a familiar problem. A preeminent power seeks to continue to build its strength, and lesser rising powers then find themselves frightened or worried or envious by the increasing power of the preeminent figure, and so seek to build up their strength, and they, as a result, clash.
Exactly. A scary perspective.
Yes.
But an important perspective to look at, especially considering the fact that it was in the Soviet bloc, and in this clash between Soviet bloc, and in US, anyone who was escaping communism, he didn't want to come back. He wanted to stay in US, in UK, and in the free world. But all students, Chinese students who are going to study in US, and they get the knowledge, they study there, they in certain levels embrace American culture, then they come back to China.
They do come back.
Or they consider themselves as the overseas Chinese.
The overseas Chinese. And remember, their family members have stayed back in China, and the government has leverage over these family members, something we have to take into account. But I worry that in this global contest, through all the students that the Chinese are sending abroad, the Chinese are acquiring a better and better understanding of us, the free world. But we Americans are not sending enough students to China. Just give you a quick example.
How many of American students speak Mandarin?
Exactly. I have a friend who teaches at Harvard Law School, and she tells me that she has many Chinese students in the regular law program. And I asked her once, how is their English? And she said to me, she had a frightened look on her face, she said, actually, in some cases, their English is better than that of my native English-speaking students. Now, I asked myself, how many Americans are in Chinese law schools who speak Mandarin better than native-born Chinese? The answer is, I'm sure, very, very few. And this brings us to a very important point. We, in the United States and the West, have to do a much better job of learning not just Chinese, but other foreign languages in this great global interconnected world, and studying other cultures and other peoples. It is a disadvantage to us that we don't do a better job of learning Mandarin, and by the way, also learning Russian, and also learning Arabic, and also learning Farsi. And by the way, I wish we had more diplomats who also knew well Polish and German and French.
Do you remember there was this funny some story where there were so many diplomats actually of Jewish origin in the US and in Poland. When they met, they couldn't find a result in English language or in French. Then they decided they will go for a cigarette and all speak Polish.
Yes,
And
the old days.
The old days. Just to wrap up this episode, would you consider to all our young viewers to learn Mandarin? Just pick up something or not?
Yeah, so I wouldn't go so far as to recommend all of your young viewers. However, though it's a difficult language, it requires many years. But for those of your younger viewers who are very interested in foreign policy and imagine for themselves a career in geopolitics, I think also Poland lives these days in a difficult neighborhood. So some challenges are more immediate, but if this young person wants to understand geopolitics, I think, yes, the study of Mandarin is urgent because, by the way, it's not just the language, but the language gives you unrivaled access to culture, to history. It allows you to read the newspapers in real time. And China will be, as far as the eye can see, a huge player on the international scene. Its role is non-trivial in the war that Russia began with Ukraine. So yes, this is, if you're going to, young viewers, if you're interested in geopolitics, please seriously consider studying Mandarin.
This was Peter Berkowitz, the Senior Fellow of Hoover Institute in Common Sense Generation. Thank you very much for watching us, and I do hope you at least take into consideration all of those challenges and opportunities as well. And I'd like to thank Polish National Foundation for making this video podcast possible.
This is Common Sense Generation. Common Sense Generation.